moving on to PARSHA Mishpatim. And PARSHA Mishpatim primarily, but not exclusively, deals with Jewish civil law. Jewish civil law, dealing with people who steal things, how you deal with that, laws of guardians, different damages, things like that. And it seems to be a bit of anticlimactic after last week's Torah portion of Yisro, where God gave us the Torah, which was such an incredible event, that we now deal with such petty and mundane laws as civil law. So we have to understand what's the concept behind that, number one. As well, PARSHA Mishpatim ends a 6-week period of time that began in the beginning of the book of Shemos. This 6-week period of time is called the time of Shovavim, which is an acronym for the 6 Torah portions, starting with Shemos, that starts with a Shin, Va'era, Bo, B'Shalach, Yisro, and Mishpatim, is the end of this Shovavim period. This Shovavim period is a unique period of time, just as we have read all about the Jewish redemption from Egypt, where a person can spiritually experience his own private redemption, as it were, and his leaving slavery. So this is a very auspicious time. We're coming to the climax. And especially in areas of sensuality, in those areas, morality, where the Yetzer Hara is very strong, this is an especially auspicious period for us to work on that, to work on the things we think about, the things we see, areas that are quite challenging for people. So it's, again, difficult to understand how, until the giving of the Torah makes a lot of sense, up to last week's Parsha, but there seems to be a lot of carryover of the Sinai event even into this Parsha. In this Parsha, although it talks a lot about civil law, in the middle of the Parsha we'll have a flashback to events that preceded the giving of the Torah at Sinai. So we still see there's some kind of connection of Sinai, even post-Sinai. We have to endeavor to see what that's all about. So when we start with these laws, the first law is a very interesting law that we would not expect to find, or more importantly, to have much relevance in our lives. So let's take a look. I have just a little bit in the English, a little bit. And the Torah says in the beginning, it says, the second verse in this week's parsha is, V'sikna Eved Ivri. If you buy for yourself an Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri. Eved means servant. Ivri means Jewish. If you buy for yourself a Jewish servant, he shall work for you 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go free for no charge. And then it says what you do with the fellow. If he was a married fellow, then he has to be brought into the house together with his wife. If he was a single fellow, he is given a Canaanite slave, which we don't have anymore. But when the Jews conquered the land of Canaan, they were able to take certain of the Canaanites as slaves, and they're not Jewish, and he was able to live with a Canaanite slave. This Jewish person was able to live with a Canaanite slave, and at the end of the 6 years, he goes free, and he goes free, but the Canaanite woman and the children are still the property of the Jewish owner. Then we continue inside the text here. Now at the end of the 6 years, but if the servant shall say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I shall not go free. I don't want to go free after 6 years. Then his master shall bring him to the door, or to the doorpost of the Jewish court, and his master shall bore through his ear with an awl. That's like a pointy thing that makes a hole in your ear.
Just pierce it.
And he shall serve him forever. Forever means until the Jubilee year. Every 50 years is a Jubilee year. Okay, this is a very, very difficult section. But first, I have to in general clarify one important issue, that many people come across this and make a great mistake. From here, one would think that Judaism believes in slavery. And that could be because some of the English translations call him a Jewish slave. And unfortunately, slavery has had a bad rap due to the historical background in North America over the last 150, 200 years. So let me explain what's the difference over here, so we don't make any mistakes about this. Slavery in general, Judaism does not believe in slavery. Taking white men, stealing black people from Africa and taking them captive and taking them to another country across the ocean and selling them as slaves to wealthy Americans is totally a violation of human rights that Judaism does not believe in. So let's make that very clear. So they ask, what's going on over here? Okay, well, I don't want to get too bogged down in all the details here, but very simply, let's look at what the situation is over here. And the Medrash picks up on this, but why is the guy exactly being sold as a slave? Why is he being sold as a slave? So there's two reasons where this can happen, but primarily, as you look later on in the parsha, in the second source, we deal with somebody who steals. A person steals, and then he's caught. And, well, if you're caught stealing, you should pay back the money. But he was smart enough to spend all the money that he stole. And now he has to repay the money. And he does not have money to repay. So what do? So now you see the brilliance of Judaism and how it is totally different than man-made secular law. In Judaism, there is no concept of jails. Because jails are an inhumane method of dealing with criminals. Why is that so? Well, look what we do to them. Can you imagine? You take a man, let's say, or a woman, doesn't matter. Take a man and you incarcerate him. Now, what are you doing by incarcerating him? There's a word we like to throw around. It's called rehabilitation. That's the last thing that's really on anybody's mind. It's a nice word, but that's not what goes on. Most criminals that come into jails come out as they call hardened criminals. There's a whole criminal world even in the jail world. And really what we do to them is totally inhumane. Confining someone to a small area where he can't have any freedom of movement, not allowing him to have the basic needs that a human being has in terms of being with someone of the opposite sex and things like that. It's a cruel way to do them. So we'll say, well, he deserves it. Well, not so fast. Not so fast. We can never look at any criminal event in a vacuum. And where Judaism parts ways with the secular world is there is a concept in Judaism of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelozeh. Every Jew is responsible for another Jew. And in society, no Jew can say, my life is fine and I don't really have to worry about other people. In the secular world, we believe that everyone has a certain amount of freedom, but I don't have to care much about the next guy. And everyone's out to take care of himself. And if somebody else has problems, we really couldn't care less about them. And it's your problem. It's a free capitalistic society. I'm a go-getter. I know how to get things done. You're not a great guy. You don't try hard. You're a lazy good-for-nothing. So you lose. And that's it. And really, there isn't care. The only reason we have a welfare system, you should know for one thing, is that the wealthy will be able to stay wealthy. Because you have a welfare system, they'd overthrow the country, plain and simple. So, okay, make the poor people healthy and give them welfare. There isn't really an idea of kindness behind this. It's really just to protect your own interests. In Judaism, that's the farthest thing from the truth. Judaism believes if there's one criminal in the world, all the Jews are responsible for that. A criminal does not become a criminal in a vacuum. So, there is a reason why he is a criminal. All right? Either it could be a million reasons. It could be he had parents who had problems. It could be financial issues. It could be all kinds of problems. But a person is generally good. Judaism believes every person has a soul. Everyone has a godly soul. If you have a godly soul, that should generate you to be a spiritual person. If a person would go to the point of stealing and doing things like this, there's got to be something behind that. And we'll talk about that. But that fellow who one day stole, it's not just because he woke up, as a 4-year-old wanting to steal. Something was wrong with the system, quote unquote, the system. But the system has people around it, and people have to take responsibility for what goes around them. Now, we're not abrogating responsibility from the perpetrator, certainly not. And certainly, we generally want this person to change. But it's our responsibility to help him change, and not by locking him up in a prison. So what goes on over here is a very simple thing. If a person had to steal, right, there's got to be some reason behind it. There's got to be some reason behind it. Now, could be he was poor, could be whatever the reason is. He chose the wrong method to deal with his challenges. But there were more proper things he could have done. And there's nothing so wrong with a poor person asking for charity. You know, what if a guy's been working all his life, he got laid off from work, he can't pay the bills? Is there something disrespectful for him to say, could you please help me out? If you believe that, you know, all your parnasa comes from God, and you're a good working man, and now you're 55 years old, you got laid off, and there's no future for you in the company, so that's your fault? Is that the way it works? Too bad, buddy, and that's the end of it? Well, everybody's got to take responsibility. The fact that you have money, someone else doesn't have money, so God bless you with the money. And if you got the money, he doesn't, definitely you have a responsibility to help him out. Now this all assumes that you believe in a God, and you believe that God is running the show. And the fact that God gives you more money than you need means you're supposed to use it to help people who don't have it. And at this point in time, he's the person that God wants to give the money to. And, you know, there would be people who should be helping him out. Obviously, for whatever reasons, he didn't choose to use a more kosher method of dealing with this. So there's a problem. There is a problem. But who's going to take care of that problem? Society has to take care of that problem. So what happens is, we say, listen, there's a concept of natural consequences. The natural consequence is you've stolen. You're not paying it back. You know, there's a victim. The victim has to be repaid. It's another important concept. You don't have this in secular law to a great extent. Yeah, if the guy's got some money, but if the guy doesn't got money? You take a guy, armed robbery, what do? We put him in jail. That really helps a lot the person who got robbed. You know, you've got to repay what you stole, plain and simple. You know, it's unbelievable. We don't understand this concept. Somebody robbed a person of $100,000. We'll lock him up for 40 years. That doesn't help the person who lost $100,000. Doesn't help the person you locked up in jail. The guy's got to pay back the $100,000. Not just to make automobile license plates. All right. So what happens? Say, listen, you owe money. You stole. So therefore, what do? We have to sell you on the open market as a servant, butler, whatever you want to call him. And now, guess what, Mac? You're going to get an honest job and make an honest living. You know, you haven't thought of that alternative, but that is a good alternative. An honest job, an honest living. And therefore, I'm not going to go through numbers here, but let's just say, whatever. Let's say you stole, $60,000 worth of money, and you can't pay it back. We would sell him on the open market as a servant, not a slave, a servant, and he makes $10,000 a year, let's say. So in 6 years, you pay off the debt. So we sell you right away for $60,000 to the fellow who's willing to have a servant for 6 years. The $60,000 goes to the victim. He's already cleaned out. He's finished. And now, mister, you're going to work for 6 years. Try it out for size. But he's not given over. But the master is not allowed to belittle him. He's not allowed to whip him. He's not allowed to degrade him. He is meant to teach him how to be a mensch. And he lives in the house with the rest of the family. Now you may ask, who's going to want to do that? Well, society, it's our responsibility to do that. And you find a righteous person who will be a good role model. The Talmud even says, what if there's only one pillow in the house? Who does it go to, the master or the servant? The answer is, it goes to the servant. And those who sit, therefore the Talmud says, he who purchases a servant for himself has really purchased a master over him. Because it's not just that you got the guy, to make money off of this guy. You're not making any money off of this guy. You're maybe breaking even, and maybe even losing a little. But there's much more than just the work that he's doing for you. He's sitting with your family, he's eating, he's seeing what normal family life is like that maybe he didn't have in his home. And the whole concept of servitude in Judaism is to really rehabilitate the person, to realize that at the end of those 6 years, for him to go forth as a free man and to be the person he's supposed to be. That is the general concept. So I wanted to spend a few minutes of that to explain how Judaism does not believe in quote-unquote slavery. The person did a crime. We really want to remediate the person. That's the goal. Now, I'm not going to get into the details. What if he's a rambunctious servant and he's not going to listen and things like that? Those are all the details. But the concept is a clear concept. Society takes responsibility, as much responsibility as the criminal. as much responsibility. The criminal has to pay his debt to society. He's not free to do what he wants. And if the courts would see he's this kind of guy who's going to start pulling out knives and trying to kill people, then there's another way to deal with such a guy. But this is the essential point. I don't want to get bogged down in details. But you see clearly from the Torah here, there is a concept that the entire society has to be involved in integrating him back in a healthy way into society. Yeah? You had a question?
Yes. I think this is an interesting concept when you apply it to white-collar type crime. What do you do with psychopaths, rapists?
Okay, well, that's a good question, and unfortunately you seem to ask good questions that get off this topic. I'm not saying it's not a good question, but there are things we have to do. There's some people that are incorrigible, and the Torah says under certain circumstances have to be put to death. Under certain circumstances, have to put to death, where there is no way to fix the guy up. So that does happen. It's the least optimal course. It's the last course we'd like to do. But Judaism, does not say there is no concept of capital punishment, although it's very difficult to enforce. But the main point, what I'm trying to bring across is that when we deal with criminals, there really is real rehabilitation, and that's what we're really going to talk about for the balance of this class. Now, of course, there are a number of questions that we have to deal with over here. And the first question is, we look at the Midrash in source number 4. The Midrash asks an interesting point. It says, why in the world do we pierce his ear? Oh, so after the 6 years, though, after the 6 years are up, and guys, I like it this way. I like being a servant. I don't want to be a free man. Well, obviously, but what happens, this is not the optimal that we were looking for. We're looking for a person who wants to go back into society and be his own man on his own 2 feet and to act as a free man. He doesn't want to. He wants to be a servant. So what do? We bore a hole in his ear. So the Midrash comments, Rashi brings down from the Midrash on source number 4, and asks, why is the ear chosen to be pierced more than any other organ? Says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, this ear that heard at Mount Sinai, don't steal, and he went and stole, should have his ear pierced. Well, that's not so simple, because it gets a little more complicated. Because there's also another time a person can be sold into servitude. What if a person's impoverished? He doesn't have any money. He's so far in the hole, he can't even borrow. He can't even get charity. He really cannot get himself out of this. Well, there's an aspect, you'll hire yourself out as a servant. It's still an honest job. It'll be a steady income. You could do that. That's another method. But in that case, what happens if he too, after 6 years, doesn't want to be a free man? So we pierce his ear also. So it's not just for stealing, obviously. It's not that guy his ear didn't hear thou shalt not steal. This guy didn't steal. But still we pierce his ear. So the Medrash goes on. So he said, well, let's refine that a little bit. It says, the ear that heard on Mount Sinai, this is what God said. He said, for the Jewish people are my servants. God said the Jewish people are my servants. They are my servants and not servants to servants. And this fellow went and acquired a master. What are you making a servant for yourself? Now, we're not talking about the first 6 years. You had to do that. You didn't have a choice. That's okay. But now the 6 years, time to leave. No, I still want to be a servant. Now that's your own free choice. You don't have to anymore. You've paid your debt to society. You're no longer impoverished. Now go and be your own man. No, I don't want to. I like being a servant. Whoa, God says, listen, I took you out of Egypt to be my servants, not to be somebody else's servant. So you weren't listening too well. Okay, let's pierce his ear. Okay, what do we see from this Midrash? We see from this Midrash that it's not the point of stealing is why we pierce his ear. That's not the real point. Because if he steals and then after 6 years has been rebuilt and leaves, then we don't pierce his ear. We don't pierce his ear if he wants to continue to be a servant. So why is that so? Why is it if a person wants to continue to be a servant, we pierce his ear more so than other crimes, quote unquote, to society? Question number 1. And what is so unique about wanting to be a servant more than anything else? That's the first issue of this Medrash we have to look into. And then there's another aspect. The rabbis ask, and this really it goes part and parcel with this, is, why was this the first mitzvah discussed right after Sinai? We just got the Torah from Sinai. There's a lot of, I'm sure, more pressing issues we should have been studying. Why was this issue the first one taught? What do I mean? This law of the Jewish servant would not be applicable for another 14 years. Till the Jews go into the land of Israel, conquer the land of Israel, live in the land of Israel, which will take 14 years. And that ultimately became even 54 years later, because they ended up staying another 40 years in the desert that was unplanned. So it's going to be a long time till this law goes into place, when there's many laws that would be applicable immediately right after Sinai. So why is this mitzvah focused on more than anything else? So the Medrash does pick up on this in source number 5, another Medrash. And it says, God said, because God said, I am the Lord your God who has taken you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. That was the first of the 10 Commandments. What does it say of a Hebrew servant? It says, if you buy an Eved Ivri, if you buy a Hebrew servant. So the Medrash seems to say there's a connection. The first command says, I took you out of Egypt, out of servitude. And now this guy became a servant. So you see there's some kind of connection, but we have to understand at a deeper level what is exactly that connection. And some of the Medrash goes on and gives another reason to say it followed the 10 Commandments, because what does it say in the 10 Commandments? To keep the Shabbos. And it says, as I created the world in 6 days and rest on the 7th, so for 6 years he shall serve you, and goes out on the 7th a free man. Okay, cute. 6 days of creation, rest on the 7th, 6 year servant, 7th go free. But what's really the connection here? It's a nice 6 and 7, but what's the real connection here? It needs a little bit more detail over here. And in general, what is really the deeper question is as follows. We don't have this institution anymore. The institution of a Jewish servant ceased when the temple was destroyed. When we don't have a Jewish homeland with a Jewish court system that follows the laws of Torah, we obviously can't implement these laws. Now, God, who gave the Torah, He knows what He knew what the history of the world would be. When we lived in Israel and we had a Jewish high court and we were in control of things and following a Torah law, we'd find a guy who stole. This would happen. But in Canada, we can't do this. We're going to go, a guy steals, we're going to do this. We can't do this. We haven't done this for almost 2,000 years. So the question is, if it's a law that hasn't been kept for technical reasons, why are we reading it every Shabbos? Once a year we read this. So there must be something much more existential about this concept that penetrates our daily lives. There has to be something very practical in our lives. Every word of the Torah has to have contemporary meaning, because God is eternal and His Torah is eternal. Right. And when we learn about a Jewish person who sells himself into slavery and after 6 years doesn't want to leave and he has to have his ear pierced, that means we today have to learn the lesson, the exact lesson. So what is that? That's what we're going to try to accomplish this evening. Now, it's also interesting. This is going to be the only. So far, it's been general, interesting questions. Now I'm going to get to one technical question. Okay, but you'll see that when we answer this, it's going to be beautiful. What do we call this servant in Hebrew? If you know just a drop of Hebrew, Eved Ivri. That's what it's called. Kisikne Eved Ivri. If you buy, Eved means servant. Ivri means Hebrew or Jewish. Okay. Now let's think about this for a minute. Now, this wording is very not clear to the rabbis who are trying to understand the message of the verse. Jewish servant. The rabbis say, I'm not sure what that means. Does it mean that the Jew is selling himself as a servant? Or maybe it means a Jew owns a servant who's not Jewish and he's selling him to another person. Eved Ivri, the two words is not clear, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Let's look at the word. You buy, I'm being technical here, you buy an Eved, a servant who's Jewish, a Jewish servant. Now, when does the guy actually become a servant? Let's take the case here. The guy stole. Is he a servant when he stole?
No.
No. Okay. He spends all the money. Is he a servant when he spends all the money? No. He gets caught by the court. Is he a servant yet?
No.
No. Okay. Now let's say, Mac, you got Moshe, you got to pay $60,000. I ain't got it. I guess we're going to have to sell you to somebody. Is he a servant yet?
No.
Still not a servant yet. Okay. Now we get a prospective master. Master comes. He hands over $60,000 to the court. The deal is consummated, and he has acquired for him a
Eved.
a person who now when he goes into his house he doesn't become a servant until he goes into the guy's house. So he didn't purchase a servant, he acquired the services, the rights, whatever. I don't want to say bought him. He acquired the services of a Jew who became a servant. Right? And so really the Torah should have said, if you bought an Ivri, to become a servant should have been the right. The text should have said, if a person acquires a Jew for the purpose of making him a servant, would have been an accurate description of what's going on. But rather the Torah says, he purchases an Eved, someone who is a servant, who happens to be Jewish. He ain't a servant when you're purchasing him. Now if, let's say, go back to the beginning, let's say the robbers, the white man who stole the black man, as soon as he captured him, he was already a servant, right? He captured him against his will. He's a servant. Now, a slave, whatever, slave. Now the white man takes the black man who is a slave. He goes to North America. He sells a black man who's a slave from one slave owner to another slave owner. Now it makes sense to say someone who purchases a slave. But in our situation, he was never a slave. He was just a Jew. After he's purchased, now he becomes a servant. So it's the word Eved Ivri is a misnomer. There's no such thing as an Eved Ivri, a servant who's Jewish. First he's Jewish, then he's purchased, then he becomes a servant. You can purchase a Jew's service to become a servant. But to call him a servant Jew, that doesn't make any sense. That's a very, very big question. You're wondering why you're getting very technical over here, Rabbi. But when you'll hear the answer, you'll appreciate the question. A lot of times, when you hear the answer, go, oh, now I understand. But God wrote the Torah, every word he wrote the Torah. He could have written, if you purchase a Jew for the purpose of being a servant. Would have reduced any question what the text meant. All right? You had a question?
No.
Oh, no? Okay. So now, let us now, to unravel some of these mysteries, get to a very fundamental point in Judaism. It's a simple point to explain, but a difficult one to live with, like most of the things I talk about. Let us discuss what slavery or servitude is. Now I want to be more using the word slave, as you'll see why in a minute. What is the existential difference between someone who is a slave and a free person? If you call somebody a slave, or you call someone a free person, one Hebrew word, maybe two in English, will tell me the difference. One of them has something, the other one doesn't.
Free will.
Free will. Bechira. Free will. All of us, I hope, are free people. We'll see. Maybe that's not true, but we'll hope so.
Why not?
We're free people. Why? Basically, you all, at about 7:30 this evening, you exercised your free will choice. You could have watched a movie. You could have robbed a bank. You could have gone to sleep. And you could go learn a class of Torah. So you had a free will choice. Since you're free people, thank God, I hope you made a good choice. And you came to the class, you used your free will choice.
I'll rob the bank on the way.
Right, on the way home, right. So now, if you'd be a servant, you go to your master, hello, Mr. Master, I want to go to a class. Wait a minute, did you finish polishing my shoes? Did you finish cleaning the kitchen? Did you finish emptying out the barn from, whatever, blah, 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 blah. You ain't going nowhere, mister. That ain't a free person. That is not a free person. Certainly we understand this concept when we're dealing with a master and slave. We understand the concept very well. And we understand that kind of slavery that was in the South was totally not acceptable. But that there is such a concept. Jews were slaves in Egypt. Really were slaves in Egypt. It's a terrible concept. But then there's freedom. So what does freedom mean? Freedom means I have no slave. I have no master. I have no master. No one's going to tell me what to do. That's what we think. And that's not exactly true. Because you can always be a slave to many different things. And the rabbis tell us, the Shem Mishmuel, one of the great Hasidic masters of the 19th century, I wrote it just in one line because I didn't have room to expand. I'll just read the line and then I'll explain what he says in source number 6. He says, the inner point of a Jew can never be enslaved. All subjugation is in the external aspect of the Jew. and I have to explain what that means. There's a concept of physicality, there's a concept of spirituality. Those are real concepts that exist. There's the physical, your hands, your body, flesh, the table, the chair. That's one aspect of reality that most people can accept. But there's a much deeper aspect of reality, and there's a spiritual realm. Although scientists do not yet have the instruments to measure it, and therefore scientists believe it doesn't exist. But as Jews who believe in a God who created the world, God disagrees with the scientists. And God said, I created a spiritual realm that is more real than the physical realm. You have to hear that again. There is a spiritual realm that is more real than the physical realm. The physical realm is one that you can see, and seeing in Judaism is not believing in 95% of the cases. There is an inner realm of existence that drives that spiritual realm. And that is the truest reality that exists. Now, a Jew has a body, a Jew has a soul. And therefore we have a physical component to ourselves, we have a spiritual component to ourselves. This is the reality of the Jew. All classic Jewish commentaries from all the ages all accept this. And therefore, it's sort of almost a little bit of a conflict within a person. You have a physical body that has an animalistic soul, has animalistic drives and passions that are not necessarily evil, but if they're unrestrained, it could be a major problem. But then we have a soul that comes, again, there's many different ways to describe it, a godly soul that is connected to the highest realms of existence. You cannot see it under a microscope. A coroner, once a secular coroner says, I've dissected millions of people, I've never found a soul yet. Right? It's not a physical thing you're going to see. But it's a spiritual entity that exists within every Jew and beyond every Jew that is a direct connection to God Himself. And that has different rules. Each one has a different system of rules. Physical body is finite, physical, and the rules of the physical world rule over a body. Bodies get old, bodies get tired, bodies can lose control, bodies can fall apart, and bodies can be, again, controlled. Bodies can be enslaved. You can take a body and make a slave out of it. If I was big enough and strong enough, I could make any one of you my slave. Your body is only so much. No matter how strong you are, you can make other people slaves, but a stronger guy will make you his slave. A body can be enslaved. The physical world, by definition, can be enslaved. The spiritual world can never be enslaved. Because the spiritual world is connected to the infinite Creator. And this is one of the wonders. We make this blessing every day. The blessing on page 12 in the Art Scroll Siddur. The blessing of Asher Yatzar Es Hadam. God, you fashioned man in great wisdom. And the blessing we make is that you placed an infinite soul in a finite body in a way that they're meant to work together. And that's an incredible thing that only God can do. But that infinite soul, by definition of it being infinite and its connection to its Creator, can never be enslaved. And that's a very important rule you have to remember. That there's a part of you that can be enslaved, and there's a part of you that can never be enslaved. And therefore, you could take a person and put him in jail. And we've seen this with the Russian dissidents. A guy like, I always forget his name. And them, right? All those fellows. Like, what was it? No matter what the Russians did, you could enslave their bodies, but not their souls, not their drive, not their determination. You could punch their mouth out and knock all their teeth out. Maybe they can't even express what they want. But what's in their souls, you cannot take that away. And certainly these people had a Jewish spark that would not allow itself to be destroyed. And it can never be destroyed. You could forget about it. You may not realize you have it. That's possible. But each and every one of us has the most powerful soul that can never be enslaved on its own. And to that extent, a Jew can never be a slave. Very important rule. So now the question now becomes, are we free people or not? God took us out of Egypt. Did that mean by definition that we are free people or not? Well, on the one hand, yeah, Paro is not our boss. There's no big monster controlling us anymore. We are free. And maybe for a while, we're totally free from outside people controlling our lives. We have to realize that the most oppressive master we have is our own body, our own lusts, our own drives that can destroy us. And anyone who has an addiction that's a self-afflicting addiction can be the first one to testify that such a person is a slave to his drives. And we have a society, unfortunately, where we have to deal with so many addictions, so many people doing things because they think they're free. And as we mentioned in the last couple of weeks, we talked about this idea of people having freedom, but you make too many mistakes, you kind of lose your freedom. Because now you've given your freedom over to your body, and now it has enslaved you. There can be no other explanation for a person who is told, you should stop smoking. You already have lung cancer. You took one lung out already, and you're still smoking. He says, I can't control myself. That's not the right words. Say, I'm a slave to my passions. And the body can be enslaved. And once your body's enslaved, that can destroy your whole life. And that's a very sad state of affairs. So therefore, what Judaism is teaching us is that don't think that slavery is just from Paro. And this is the message that we're being told right here and right now. We finished 5 Torah portions. We got out of slavery. But the question is, have we really gotten out of slavery? Is perhaps the worst slavery still yet to come? The slavery of our own bodily passions that will reduce us to nothing. That is a great problem. So now what are we going to do? And that was God's great concern. God's great concern is, I took you out of Egypt. You're free people. What are you going to do with this freedom? So we're told the first commandment is, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord who took you out of Egypt, who took you out of the house of bondage. And I want to take you out forever from any kind of bondage. But you're going to see there's a few conditions to make that happen, which we'll discuss in 1 minute. But that's the issue. What makes you a free person? When you are, we'll use, people are what we call on certain frequencies. Now, most in the world are in the physical frequency, because most things you do in this world are physical. Most things, you go to work, you have to make money, you buy food, you live in a house. Everything's kind of physical. And we could be fooled and think that that's the only reality we live in. The spiritual one is inside. It's like deep inside. You got to work hard to find it, excavate it, as it were. It's there. It's operating 100% in each and every one of us. But if we are oblivious to it, it doesn't help us any. We're very much aware of our bodies. And we tend to believe that, the body rules, because the rules kind of fit in. And we have to make decisions in life usually based on what the body needs. And how else could you explain a person who gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to work, and you ask him, maybe you'd like to go pray a little first? I can't. I have to be downtown at 7 o'clock. We're downtown at 7 o'clock. And then you say, okay, I understand, but maybe you could come to a Chumash class tonight at 8 o'clock. No, you say, I don't leave downtown till about 7:30. And I don't even make it home till 8:30. And then I have to eat something and say a couple words to the kids. And so I say to myself, and there's nice people, good people. I say, Mamish, he's such a slave. But his own choice. He's got that job. He makes a lot of money. But he's a slave. Because there's only one thing driving his world, the physical. And that's what hooks you into that slavery. Now we get to the difficult part. So, Rabbi, what are you suggesting? That we shouldn't be slaves to that? Well, you have to realize there's an inner reality that's deeper than that reality. You have to realize that there's an Almighty, there's a Creator. And the Creator is there to take care of your needs. And the Almighty provides for you. Now, the Almighty doesn't say, sit back and wait for it to happen. No, the Almighty says you have to go to work. The Almighty says you have to go to work. The Almighty says, but don't be fooled by what your eyes see. Don't be fooled and think that all those hours are making that success. Because you saw 2 weeks ago when I brought the manna from heaven for 40 years, I'm the one who provides for you. Don't make a mistake. I'm the one who provides. You're the vessel through whom I provide through. Now, that's a very hard concept to accept. Especially when you go to work for 60 hours, you're making lots of money. And the more you work, the more money you make. You could be fooled into thinking that happens. But God says, if you really pay good attention, you'll see that that's not going on. And you're wondering, how come you're spending all that time and 6 clients are not accepting your offers, even though your offer is better than the next guy? And there's this guy, your competition, who doesn't have half the brains you have, half the skill you have, and he's getting these contracts. If you keep your eye on the ball, you start to realize, it's not just me. I'm just going through the motions that God wants me to do. He wants me to do this. But to realize there's an inner reality that's going on over here. There's a creator who's really the one making sure you get that check at the end of the month. You think that check comes from your boss. God says, it really doesn't. Because in 1 second, I can stroke you. You won't make a penny the rest of your life. In 1 second, I can stroke the economy. We all live every moment. We breathe, think. There's a nice movie you can watch if you watch movies, right? Most movies are not fit to be watched, but the movie about the gifted hands, about the sort of Ben Carson, who was started as an underprivileged African American who became one of the top child neurosurgeons in the world. Okay, incredible. Who do you think would play such a part? Cuba Gooding Jr., right? Of course, right? So I'm planning on showing the Shul next year, maybe. It's a very beautiful movie. It's totally clean. It's like, Mom, it's not one bad scene. Gifted hands. That's what you have to be a neurosurgeon. Anyway, he talks about, and you know what? You can even do this yourself. You can go to you click on Google, Ben Carson, and write something, Google speeches or whatever. And he gives a talk for 10 minutes. And you can see the guy. And he himself, he's a doctor. He's not Jewish. But he describes the whole operation of the brain as nothing less than the greatest miracle in the history of the world. And it's how he describes when a person just says one word, he's able, I can't even come close to replicate it. In 2 minutes, he says so fast, this part connects to this part, all these things, and he's saying words, and he's probably learned this routine, and he goes, and that's all he did, just to blink your eye. And he said, this bundle of a couple pounds of nerve system, it does incredible things. Now, you're going to say that happened by accident? It's the Creator that makes that happen. The Creator's making everything happen. That doesn't allow you to abrogate your responsibilities. Don't say, I'm very religious, I don't go to work. No, that's not a religious person. You have to go to work, but know that God does it. And if God's doing it already, you know what? You can pray first in the morning and then go to work. And you can tell your boss, I worked 8 hours today. That's enough. Ooh, but the holy, mighty master may fire you. You have a bigger master. You're the Creator. Now that depends on what kind of eyes you have. You have the eyes that the physical world rules. If you're into that kind of world, then the physical world dictates. And you will be a slave to that world. If you understand there's an inner content, there's a spiritual realm that is paralleling the physical realm, and not just paralleling, but it's underpinning that entire realm, then all of a sudden you're going to be a very free person. The person whose boss says, if you don't finish this project before Shabbos, you're not leaving till you finish the job, or I'll fire you. And if you feel that you have to desecrate the Shabbos to be able to finish that job, then you're in a system of physical. And you only believe that through the physical means I'll make my parnasa, then you're a slave into that system. The system that you believe in is the one God will make you a slave to. If you say, I believe there's a Creator who provides me with what I need, and I'm making my best effort, I'm a good worker, and I'm trying. I'm not talking about a guy who's lazy, and I'm working hard, and I'm willing to come in on Sunday, and I'm willing to put in extra hours, but when it's 3 o'clock on Friday, I gotta leave. Then if you believe that, then you're in a different system. And you are not a slave. I was once, many years ago, I was counseling a person who was on the fence of returning to Yiddishkeit. He's going to classes, he's coming to prayers, but Shabbos, he's still got to work on Shabbos. And slowly trying to wean him away. And then there was one particular Friday where he said it was a very important meeting, with his boss, a bunch of workers, and the meeting was in the winter, obviously, and the meeting was set for 4 o'clock Friday. Right? Candle lighting's at 4:23. So he says to me, so what am I supposed to do? This is a very important meeting. Well, I said, tell your boss, you're really sorry. You can't make it. You can't make it. And he says, but I could lose my job. I said, well, that's something you have to decide. You have to decide who is making your parnasa. Okay, you have to decide. So I say, tell him like this: I can come to the meeting at 4, but I have to leave at 4:15 because I got to be in the door. It's only 10 minutes away, thank God. You can make the meeting earlier. You could but I'll be there at 4. I could say my bit, but then I got to leave at 4:15. So anyway, I said that. But of course, a rabbi will never tell a convert what to do. Just tell him what your options are and what choices you will be ultimately making. And explain to this fellow, you're deciding what system rules your life now. So anyway, so that Friday night, I saw the guy in Shul. So I said, what happened? He said, well, I left at 4:15 like you told me. I said, so how did you feel when you left? He said, I never felt freer in my life.
Wow.
And he didn't get fired, by the way. As a matter of fact, when there was need to make a promotion, he got the promotion a few weeks later. Okay? I'm just giving you an example of there's two systems in life. And God created that way. That's part of the test of life. What system are you into over here? All right. So now we have that's the issue. Only the physical can be enslaved. Only the physical can be enslaved. The spiritual can never be enslaved. Nobody can take that away from you. Let me ask you, take a picture in your mind, and of course we've seen these pictures. Holocaust pictures where you have a Hasidic Jew, a very pronounced looking Jew, on the floor with a boot over his neck. You go up the leg and you see a Nazi with his whip and his boot smiling at the Jew who's out there. Question: who is the free person?
The Jew underneath.
Right? The Nazi is obviously not free because, as they all said, we were just taking orders. Well, that's not a very free person who's taking orders, are you? But more than that, the Nazi, the German, was like a toy. You know how you press a button to get them angry. Do something that looks Jewish and they get angry. They can't control themselves. They're not free. They weren't free to any of their desires. As sophisticated as Germans were, as sophisticated as they were, they're a bunch of behemoths to murder 6 million people. Right? So they weren't in control. The Nazi can't control himself when he sees a Jew. He gets irritated by just looking at a Jew. He's not a free man. But the Jew who believes in God with the boot to his throat, he's the free man, because he would never have his boot on anybody's throat. Now, it doesn't mean to say he's in an enviable position, and he could be shot a minute later. But remember, that's only in the physical world. Even if somebody kills you, he still hasn't enslaved your soul. You go to Gan Eden, you're totally free. That's a very important. Remember, we keep talking about equations. You see, what I'm trying to teach is equations. These are the equations of the universe, and every one of us, you can't get around these equations. If you are hooked into the physical, you must be a slave to something. If you're hooked into the spiritual, aside from God, you're not a slave to anything. So the question is, you have to decide what you want. And that's what God was telling the Jewish people. He said, I could take you physically out of Egypt. I can do that. But I cannot make you free in the existential sense. Because you've got to come a little bit on your own to get into that world of the spiritual. When you get into that world of the spiritual, then you will be a free person. And where does it play itself out more than anything else? In civil law. In civil law, and you've got to deal with people. It's unfortunate that you could have people who are visibly orthodox, I underline the word visibly orthodox, who could be found cheating in business. Say, Rabbi, how can an Orthodox Jew cheat in business? My answer is, he's only visibly Orthodox. He's an Orthodox Jew who is a slave to the physical system. And he is not, though he dresses one way, but he's not really into the spiritual system. Now, only a person who is a slave would ever contemplate cheating in business, because he doesn't believe that God is taking care of his parnasa. It's not taken care of. Does it stop?
It's 50 minutes. No?
Oh, there might be a couple more. You'll see when the red thing goes off. You'll make a little click, and I'm glad you're being conscientious about that. Thank you. So, yeah.
Isn't it when we were slaves in Egypt, Hashem took us earlier?
We're going to get to that. I'm going to have to get to that. It's an important point. Hang on to that. Okay, very good. So now let's discuss one more point, and now we'll make a lot of sense. We might not answer all the questions today, but I think this is a very important point right here. This is the most liberating concept you'll learn for a long time. The liberating concept. If you're hooked into spirituality, nobody can make you a slave. You cannot be a slave. So that's point number one. Slavery is only found in the externals of life. But now let's go to another fundamental question. First commandment. Let's look in source number 7 where I wrote it out clearly. So now you understand what that Shmuel said. Before I forget, 6. The inner point of the Jew can never be enslaved. Do you understand? Because the inner point of the Jew is spirituality. It's the soul. All subjugation is in the external aspect of the Jew. Now, also, one other interesting thing. The numbers 6 and 7 mystically are very important. 6 represents the physical realm. Why? Because there's 6 points. You have north, south, east, west, up, down. All physicality is represented by 6 points, and that is the ultimate of physicality. Right? Then there's the 7th point. Where's the 7th point? The midpoint. Let's say you have a cube, whatever. The midpoint in the middle. Everything is equidistant in the middle. That's the midpoint. That's the point you don't really see, as it were, but really everything revolves around that midpoint. That's point number 7. That's number 7. God created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th. 6 days of physicality. Shabbat is spirituality. Shabbat really tells you what's behind those 6 days of the week. What you really were working for. You thought it was for physical things. Shabbos tells you, no, there's a whole different inner spiritual content to reality. Same thing, this guy who stole. Let's think for a minute. Think good and hard. For you to take somebody else's money, what has to be going on in your mind philosophically? Why are you stealing somebody's money? Can't you find a kosher way to provide for your needs? There are many kosher ways. Try harder to find a job. And even begging is a kosher way to make money. Because the Torah has a mitzvah of giving tzedakah. There's nothing wrong with you asking for tzedakah. It's not a sin. And in fact, you're letting another guy do a mitzvah. Right? So what kind of person would steal from somebody? A person who's hooked into the physical system.
Slave.
A person who's a slave to the physical system. And the only way I can make money is if I steal it. It's easy, quick, and easy, because that's the physical system. So now you understand who's the real slave and when are you the real slave. Do you have to be a slave under someone to be a slave? No. A slave to the physical world is when you're a slave. The person who stole from another Jew, taking from another Jew, you know how unthinkable that is? Don't you know there's a God who told you not to do this? Don't you know God will take care of you in a kosher way? And if you feel the only way you can take care of yourself is with that poor choice, you obviously are a slave to the physical system, right? If you believe there was an inner content here, you'd say, I don't understand why, but God is not giving me parnasa easily. There must be a spiritual reason behind it. And your neshama would be attuned to that and would understand that. And would say, God is giving me the best possible situation, and right now not having money is the best possible situation for reasons that I'm not fully aware of at this point in time. That's a spiritual connection. Then he wouldn't think of stealing. He'd find another way to get it. So when did the guy become a servant? When did he become a slave? Before he got sold. Now you know what the Torah calls him, an Eved Ivri, a servant who happens to be Jewish. You understand? You could be a Jewish. And you know what? And that's what the Torah is teaching you. We don't need court systems to officially make a Jew an Eved Ivri. There are tens of thousands of Eved Ivris walking around Toronto today. People who cannot control their addictions to making money or all these other things in life, who are afraid of what the next day will bring because they don't realize the inner realities of a spiritual world. So this is the PARSHA for many of us. Many people who don't have the faith that God will provide for them. And therefore, anybody who has cheated in business is a slave. Anybody who's cheated on somebody else is a slave. There's all kinds of addictions you got out there. We have to realize that is the worst scenario you could be in. You don't have to wait to get caught to be considered a slave. Now, of course, so what happens? So what do we do to this fellow? So now you understand why he's called an Eved. It's beautiful now, right? It's beautiful. Torah, God is being so precise. He's telling you he's a servant even before he's sold. That's the whole point. So now what do? We have him be a slave for 6 years. Why 6 years? Because we now mirror back to him his failed conception of what the world is. He was living in the world of 6. 6 is the physical world. And he thinks that's the be-all and the end-all. And God says, you know, that's what got you into this mess, buddy. And now you're sold for 6 years to say, now do you really like now? You thought you were a free man when you were stealing? You weren't a free man. You were a slave. But in case you don't understand what slavery is, now go be a servant to somebody else. You're going to see what it's like. Do you like that? We're just playing out to him what he really is living without even realizing that that's happening. That's the way God works. There's a concept of measure for measure, but not tit for tat. God deals with measure for measure so we can learn what our mistake is and correct the mistake. God loves us. He wants us, if we do something wrong, to learn from the mistake. And measure for measure, we learn from the mistake. And this guy's been walking around for years being a servant to his passions and desires. So now God says, well, let's just make it in a way that you really see it. And now you can't do anything you want because this guy's your boss. But only for 6 years. Because 6 is nature, is the physical world. Hopefully you'll learn this lesson, and then in the 7th year, you go free. What does it mean you go free? It doesn't mean you just go free from the master. You go free from your own masters inside of you. Why? Because you're going to see a man who doesn't really have to take care of you. You really are an undesirable person from many people's perspective. Guy takes you into his house. He shows you how to be a mensch. There's only one pillow. He gave you his pillow because he lives in a different reality. Surround yourself in a healthy home and be a servant to a healthy, righteous person, and you'll realize that you are really a slave. And now you begin to realize what freedom really would be. And that number 7 will show the freedom that we hope you'd have. But if after 6 years you say, no, I still would like to be a slave, then God says, that's not what I made you for. I didn't make you to always be a servant to somebody. You have to be able to get out on your own and have the confidence that you can be connected to spirituality and be your own person. And that's what God says. I didn't free you to be someone's servant, to be anybody's servant, and not a servant to yourself either. And that's why the ear that didn't hear this message has to be fixed up. But it's one step deeper, and I have to get this next point in, because this is really critical, this next point. Because we have to get this second point in. I only got 13 minutes to go. So back to the 7th source. First commandment. Let's truly understand what's the first commandment saying. And I'll ask a very simple question. What does the commandment say? I am Hashem your God, who has taken you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. Now this is the first sentence God says to the Jewish people. Now you want that first sentence to be a real blockbuster, right? Because like everything flows from that, you know. I am the wimpy Lord who took you out. No, I'm not really interested in what you got to say. I mean, everything, don't worship idols, don't say my name in vain, keep the Shabbos, honor your parents, don't kill. Who are you to tell me all that? Well, the first commandment better deal with that. Now, if you were God and you were trying to submit a CV to a nation to accept you as a God, what would you put down as your experience? What makes you worthy to be the God? So, what would you write? Now, you're God for a minute, okay? You're trying to be you're applying to be God of the Jewish people. I know it's a funny scenario, but I'm just humor me. Okay. And they're taking applicants. You want to be God? So what do you got? What's on your resume? So now, if you were God, and we read the term to this point, what would you put on the resume? And you only can put one thing on the resume.
I'm the creator of everything.
The creator of the world.
Yep.
I'm not minimizing taking the Jews out of Egypt. That was pretty good. But I think creating the world's a lot better, frankly. I mean, remember, there was nothing. Nothing. But where did he put? He made that first big bang, whatever he did. He made everything. Now, isn't that a little bit more, exciting than, okay, it was nice, he took the Jews out. Okay, but he didn't make the world. If he didn't make the world, okay. He beat up Paro. He knew he has power. He could do certain things. Yeah, he can make hail and blood and this and that. That's good, but he can't make the world. So all the commentators ask, why didn't God say, I am the Lord who created the world? So the common answer from the Kuzari, which is the correct answer, is God wasn't trying to impress the Jewish people that he's a powerful creator, because he doesn't have to impress everybody. But he's saying, but let's remember, this whole Sinai revelation is for what purpose? For us to have a relationship. and that you are my people, and I am your God. And all you care about in a relationship is, well, what have you done for me? And God says, I took you out of Egypt. I'm not trying to impress the world that I'm the creator. I'm not God. You know, we have a special relationship, me and you, Jewish people. I'm your God. If I wanted, I would invite the whole world to Sinai, but I didn't. If I invited the whole world to Sinai, I tell them I'm the creator. But it's you I have a special relationship with. I want to remind you, what did I do to show that how much I love you? I took you out of Egypt. So if you're looking to get married to a God, then you want to know, what did the God do that he showed his love for me? And that's a beautiful answer. That's a very true answer. Mm-hmm. But the SHMOT has a second answer that doesn't conflict with the first answer, but takes a deeper second message. And the message is like this, and this is everything we've been talking about until now. And this is your point, Esther. Okay. The Jewish people, there was a covenant between God and Avram. And God said to Avram, I want you to know the Jewish people are going to be my people, but there's a certain purification process that has to happen. And that process is they have to be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. Why that's the process, I don't have time to get. I need another class for that. But basically, the simple way is the whole world was looking at the world in the first way of the physical realm. And looking at the physical realm, you're going to be slaves to the whole world. I want the Jews, when they come out of Egypt, being my people, to be totally hooked into the spiritual realm. To be perfectly hooked into that spiritual realm. And for reasons that I don't have time to explain now, being a slave in a very physical world for 400 years and staying firm with your Judaism will allow you to cut through the garbage of the physical world and really be able to get in tune with the spiritual realm. If you can hang on for 400 years, that will happen. That was the deal. Now, had they stayed for the 400 years, they would have clearly seen the falseness of the physical realm, would have walked out with a beautiful focus of what spirituality was all about. That would have been amazing. Let us make an analogy to a fruit with peels. Now the fruit, I'm going to ask you, if you have a fruit in your hand, let's say a banana, now who would eat the peel? Now let's even say more. The banana looks really beautiful. It's a beautiful yellow banana. You know, it's like momish. It's beautiful, right? And sometimes it looks better when you take out a banana. The banana doesn't look as nice as the peel a lot of times. Right? Now, would anybody be an idiot to eat a peel and throw away the banana? I think when I was a little kid, I once saw a cartoon once. Some silly thing to say in your mind's reason. You know, this guy was looking. I forgot what he was doing. He was peeling the bananas, threw away the banana, and ate the peel. You know, like, so you're supposed to laugh. You know, because that's like, for a kid, that's stupid, right? So you'll laugh, right? But would anybody do that? No, but people do it all the time. We look what's glitzy on the outside, and that we eat, and what's inside we don't even look. So God says, listen, you have the ability to be people who eat the flesh of the fruit all the time. Get to the reality. There's a big peel. This peel is going to take 400 years to peel it off. That's how much garbage of superficiality is in this world. We've got to peel it off. If you stay for 400 years, you'll get the peel off, and you'll always see things the way they are, and then you'll be the most free people in the world. But unfortunately, the plan didn't work that way. After 210 years, the Jews were not so successful. They were buying into the system of the peel. And God says, I have a major problem here. How am I going to get you guys out now? If I wait any longer, you're finished. You're going to assimilate. You're almost buying into this peel business. So now, if we're trying to get them to get to the flesh, and I can't get the peel off, how am I going to get to the flesh? Take a knife and cut it. Cut it open. Get right through the peels. And here's the flesh. Go eat it. That's what God did when He made the 10 plagues. He says, guys, you're not getting the peel off fast enough. If anything, you're putting on more peels. You've got to see this inner world for what it's like. And therefore, God said, I will make 10 plagues, split the sea, and not only that, I'm going to reveal myself to you at Sinai. At that point, boy, did they take a juicy bite out of that fruit. And they really tasted the inner content of spirituality. And God said, that is your ticket to freedom. We had hoped that you could peel the fruit by yourself. And once you peel that fruit, it would be totally a fruit, and you see life totally for what it really is. Then you'd be free on your own. But you couldn't do it on your own. So what did I have to do? I had to enter, so to speak, bust through, crash through the peel, expose the fruit. And temporarily you got to see that. But once you've seen it once, you can't deny what you saw. And you can't deny there's a God, and you can't deny there's spirituality in the world. You can't deny it. The Midrash says that at Sinai, the Jews saw a prophetic vision. They says they saw what is normally heard, and they heard what is normally seen. It should take about an hour for me to explain what that means. But let me just say it simply. You know those pictures, those two-dimensional pictures that if you look at them, it's called a magic eye.
Yeah.
If you let your eyes cross, you'll see a different picture will emerge from it, a three-dimensional picture. Right? You see a bunch of lines, and all of a sudden, 3 cows grazing in the meadow. Now, I'm going to ask you, what's the real picture, what's not the real picture? I think this is one of the great analogies of reality. Now, let me make it a little better. What if you take a look at a picture, and they say the two-dimensional picture is 3 cows grazing in the meadow, right? And then behind the picture, you see God putting energies into the cow's existence. That'd be a heck of a picture, wouldn't it?
Okay.
Would that be a heck of a picture?
Yeah.
And now you ask, which is the real? But then you blink your eyes, oh, it's gone. Now you just see the 3 cows grazing in the meadow. At Sinai, God gave him the 3D picture. He said, I want you to know, that's what prophecy is. You can see the energy behind the picture. Now you blink, it's gone, but you can never deny what you saw. You can never deny what you saw. Now we're going to look at the world differently. Look at it differently. You got to bite out of the fruit. You got to bite out of the fruit. So God says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your King, your Master, your God. Meaning to say, I revealed myself to you. And because I did that, I took you out of Egypt, Mibeis Avodim, from the house of bondage.
And saved you.
In other words, how did I get you out of the house of bondage? By revealing myself to you. By letting you taste what a spiritual content life is. And now you've got it. Now you've tasted it. We shortcutted the system, as it were. And why? So you could be free. Your freedom. We said that spirituality can never be enslaved. But what do you do to someone who is a slave? How do you get him out of the slavery? You've got to inject a heavy dose of spirituality right through that system. And you say, grab onto it, and I'll get you out. And that's what God did with the Jewish people. And that's what the Shul says. That's what the first commandment says. The first commandment says, more than anything, don't forget that you were slaves. And the only reason you're not a slave is because you connected to the spiritual connection that I offered you. And if you ever let go of it, you'll fall right back where you came from beforehand. And your freedom is contingent on that. Because you know what? There is still a lot of peel all around. And it still looks very seductive. And the only way you cannot be fooled by the peel is if you're holding on to that fruit. You're holding on to that fruit, you see what the truth is, you're not going to mistake that. But as soon as you let go, we never cleared up that peel. It's still around. And therefore, the only way you're going to be able to believe reality is to clutch onto spirituality. That I am the Lord who took you out of Egypt from the house of bondage through that connection. So that's the second point. Spirituality can never be enslaved. If I'm in it, I can never be enslaved. But what if I'm not in it? So God can bring spirituality into you. If you are willing to grab it, 80% of the Jews did not want to grab it, and therefore they didn't go out of Egypt. For those who grabbed onto it, said, I see the reality, I can't deny what I felt and I saw, and I know this is true and the other thing's not true. Then you say, you know what, I'm not fooled by that. And God says, but that'll only work if you still stay connected. Once you let go, the peel's going to come back and you're going to be finished. Now you can understand why we're talking about a slave right after the 10 Commandments. God's saying, 10 Commandments are amazing. And I could do a lot for you. I can do almost anything, but I can't keep you free. I can keep my hand out there. You can want to grab my hand and you'll see things with clarity, but I can't force you. And I'm going to show you the biggest proof. You could have a Jew who will steal and be willing to remain to be a slave. And that kind of person is not looking at reality. And that's the conclusion of these 6 weeks. Where after everything we've had and everything that God can do for us, at the end of the day, we still have to be willing to look at the world in this deeper way. And that's why this is very relevant. And that's why we are all to some degree a slave. We are. And the question is, what are we going to do to get that out? Well, what do? We have a few options. One of them, the most beautiful one, is Shabbos. If we really keep the Shabbat the way it's meant to be kept, God will show you the inner picture. That is the day of the soul. Shabbos is the day of the soul. Your soul is ready to explode. And you can feel it. But you've got to be in the position to feel it. You can't be feeling it when you're working on the Sabbath, can you? Because then you're still in the other world. If you're still in the other world, how are you going to feel the inner world, the spiritual world? You can't feel it. That's why there's restrictions not to desecrate the Shabbos. Not because God's a mean God that doesn't want you to work on Shabbos. It's just if you're living in that other world, you can't feel that world of the soul. And that's why that Medrash says, 6 days you work, the seventh day you rest. That's why God created the world in 6 days of one way of looking at the world physical, but then comes the spiritual content. And that's what we have to do every week. 6 days we work, but we don't get fooled by that. We come back to the Shabbos and tells us the things we really are. And when you really keep your Shabbos properly, you feel that spiritual content. That's how you grab onto that. You also grab onto that every time you come to a Torah class. Every time you learn God's Torah, it's like you're at Sinai, because it isn't any different. Everything I'm telling you today is everything that God told the Jewish people 3,300 years ago. Looking at the world in a deeper way. That's what Judaism is. Seeing the true realities of life. And that is the real freedom. You know, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedom in Canada. But is it freedom of the soul or freedom of the body? A country with so much freedom, people can't control themselves. Policemen get called in 1 million times a day to break up fights between husbands and wives who want to kill each other because they're so free. Husbands and wives who are destroying their children in their divorces because they're so free. Businessmen who are doing hostile takeovers and making people unemployed because they're so free. It's such a free world. We have to take so many antidepressants because we're so free. Why is that happening? It's a world that doesn't understand there's a God in this world. If you understand there's a God in this world, you have a tremendous power. It's incredible. You have the power to say, I don't have to take revenge on this fellow. The power that says, just because Pavlov rang the bell doesn't mean I have to salivate. And to say there are bigger and better things to do in this world. So this PARSHA is very relevant. And we all have to ask ourselves this week, am I a slave? Am I not a slave? And there's real easy ways to tell. Can people push your buttons and get you upset? Then you know you're a slave. You know, I know that certain people, if I bring up a topic, they get all of a sudden angry. So that's a slave. You know, I try to work on my slavery. We all try to work a little bit on slavery. But how? To realize there's a God, there's a spiritual way of looking at things, there's a deeper way of looking at things, there's a plan for this world. And to realize that God is saying, just give me your hand and I'll let you see the world the way you're supposed to see it. That is the real freedom that we're hoping to get. Okay, questions? Comments?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah?
Can your spirit be enslaved to the will of God?
Yes, that's what you want. But that's the ultimate freedom, because you're enslaved to clarity.
Yeah. So that.
You know, when you're enslaved to the will of God, it means that when somebody does something bad to you, you don't want to take revenge.
Yeah, you're free.
You don't want to take revenge.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Now, there's much deeper ideas here that can happen. You know, sometimes people don't realize they have souls. They can do horrifically terrible things. And sometimes they can even use their soul to do things really bad that they couldn't do otherwise. But we don't have time to go there. Okay, good? Okay, thank you for listening.